So I call the meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 6 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates. Today we will hear from the representatives of the Office of the Auditor General as part of the committee's study of air defence procurement projects and its study of the National Shipbuilding Strategy. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Regarding the speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do the best we can to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether participating virtually or in person. I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants to this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. Given the ongoing pandemic situation and in light of the recommendations from public health authorities, as well as the directive of the Board of Internal Economy on October 19, 2021, to remain healthy and safe, the following is recommended for all those attending the meeting in person. Anyone with symptoms should participate by Zoom and not attend the meeting in person. Everyone must maintain 2-meter physical distancing, whether seated or standing. Everyone must wear a non-medical mask when circulating in the room. It is recommended in the strongest possible terms that members wear their mask at all times, including when seated. Non-medical masks, which provide better clarity over cloth masks, are available in the room. Everyone present must maintain proper hand hygiene by using the hand sanitizer at the room entrance. Committee rooms are cleaned before and after each meeting. To maintain this, everyone is encouraged to clean surfaces such as the desk, chair, and microphone with the provided disinfectant wipes when vacating or taking a seat. As the chair, I will be enforcing these measures for the duration of the meeting, and I thank members in advance for your cooperation. I would now invite the representatives of the Auditor General's Office to make their opening statements.
Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our fall 2018 report on Canada's fighter force and our report on the National Shipbuilding Strategy, which was tabled in the House of Commons in February 2021. I would like to acknowledge that this hearing is taking place on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Joining me today is Nicholas Swales, the principal who is responsible for the audit of the National Shipbuilding Strategy. I would like to start with our fall 2018 audit of Canada's fighter force. This audit examined whether national defence managed risks to the fighter force so that it could meet Canada's commitments to NORAD and NATO until a replacement fleet is operational. In 2016, the Government of Canada directed National Defence to have enough fighter aircraft available every day to meet the highest NORAD alert level and Canada's NATO commitment at the same time. This meant that National Defence had to increase the number of fighter aircraft available for operations by 23%. This new requirement came at a time when the Royal Canadian Air Force faced a growing shortage of trained and experienced pilots and technicians. To meet the new requirement, the government purchased used fighter jets from Australia as an interim solution to bridge the gap until it can roll out a replacement fleet. The Australian jets are about 30 years old and have the same operational limitations as Canada's current fleet of CF-18 aircraft. National Defence expected to spend almost $3 billion to extend the life of its fleet and to buy and operate the Australian jets. However, since the department did not have a plan to deal with its biggest obstacles, a shortage of experienced pilots and the CF-18's declining combat capability, these spending decisions would not have been enough to ensure that the Air Force would have had available on a daily basis the number of aircraft needed to meet the highest NORAD alert level and Canada's NATO commitment at the same time. We noted that more aircraft would not solve National Defence's problems unless the department knew how and by when it could solve the pilot shortages and improve combat capability. We made 2 recommendations in our report, and National Defence agreed with both. Passons maintenant à notre audit sur la stratégie.
Let's now look at our national naval construction strategy. The audit gave us opportunity to examine the program, but once the process is concluded, the Canadian Coast Guard, and the Marine will operate fleets of large vessels to support Canada's participation in security operations around the world. They are also used to support marine science and to ensure that Canada's waterways are safe and accessible. This audit examined whether these vessels were being renewed in a timely manner. Timely renewal is important because of the need to replace aging fleets and introduce new capabilities. In 2010, the government launched the National Shipbuilding Strategy with the goals of renewing these fleets in a timely and affordable manner, of creating and supporting a sustainable marine sector in Canada, and of generating economic benefits for Canada. The strategy also calls for the building of at least 50 large science and defense vessels over about 30 years. Overall, we found that during our audit period, the National Shipbuilding Strategy was slow to deliver the combat and non-combat ships that Canada needs to meet its domestic and international obligations for science and defense. The delivery of many ships had been significantly delayed. Further delays could result in several ships being retired before their replacements are operational. National Defence, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Public Services and Procurement Canada, and Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada reacted to these delays. However, we are still concerned that the strategy has been slow to deliver. Considering the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on work in departments and shipyards, and with the bulk of new ships yet to be built, departments need to look for opportunities to improve how they manage risks and contingencies. Public Services and Procurement Canada, National Defence, and Fisheries and Oceans Canada agreed with the 3 recommendations we made in this report. Both of these audits underscore the importance of renewing fleets in a timely manner to avoid capability gaps that could jeopardize the ability of Canada to deliver on its national and international defense and science commitments. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. We would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. And so we will start our first round, and we'll start with Mr. Paul Hoos, 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, Mr. Hayes. Thank you for coming. In your report, you talk about the absence of a plan that the National Defense had thought about spending $3 billion without a plan. What was even more important was the shortage of pilots and the fact that there were capacity issues. The department responded. You presented a plan, but you said the pilot shortage had not been resolved because 4 years later, you have observations which make us believe that there are some changes. Or do you have observations to make us feel that there are changes? Thank you. The minister responded to our recommendation concerning the recruitment, but we do not have any information yet about any progress they've made. I was part of the debate 4 years ago. It was said there were capability gaps, and they were saying that 18 Super Hornets were going to be bought, and we already knew that there was a shortage of pilots. After pressure, some problems, They said that some used planes were going to be used, but some former commanders said that it was stupid. So as Auditor General, you observed that at the time, the decision to buy planes was more a political one, more than an operational one, considering that there were no pilots and technicians to take care of what we had already. Our observation was that there was a shortage of pilots and technicians. In our report, we stated that there were only 64% of the pilots were qualified. That's a huge number of pilots that we need to be able to respect the demands and the capabilities required by NATO and NORAD. So talking about capabilities, in 2018, the Air Force had a deficit because of the lack of shortage. Now, with commitments, we are talking about the situation in Ukraine. Do you think that we are not at all in a position to support our allies if we need to do that? Let me turn to Mr. Swain, who may answer that question. I do not have an answer myself. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The issue is the increase in the level of demands on our fighter force and the possibility of sending assistance to NORAD at the same time. So the context of a specific situation may depend on the circumstances in those areas. Let's come back to the pilots. Right now, we have two problems. One, it takes a lot of time to resolve the purchase of new jets. It has been postponed year after year. We started with the old Australian planes. There were no pilots to pilot them. And we do not seem to have resolved the problem of pilots. Are young Canadians not interested? From your survey, are people saying that they are not going to pilot old fighter jets in Canada? They do not see the need. They will end their career as pilot, only piloting old planes. Is that something that was reported that may be discouraging people from becoming pilots? I think that's a problem for the department when it comes to recruitment. There are other issues as well. For example, airlines that are a lot older, they need a lot of maintenance to be used. So there's a problem there as well. But recruitment is a real issue for the forces. An audit was carried out a few years ago on recruitment in the Canadian Armed Forces. And what did the audit reveal? That there was lack of participation because of old planes. That audit did not talk about equipment of planes or capability issues, but the audit pointed out that there was a need for the forces to act on the recruitment issue. Let me conclude. $3 billion was announced without any plan and without any pilots. Should we consider that this was wasted money? Was there a minimum basis to justify this $3 billion? I think that number is tied to the realities that have to do with maintaining a fleet that is old. You also have the cost of buying the Australian jet. It's a huge number. As you said, there is no plan there was no plan at the time of our audit. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Father, for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just, first of all, thank you so much for both reports. They're very illuminating and very helpful. So thanks for your work on them. And I'm glad to see your recommendations were considered. Can I ask a question? You just talked about no plan. You had done, I believe, an audit in 2012 related to replacing Canada's fighter jets. What was found in that audit, and how did that affect the current strategy of replacing fighter jets? And was there a plan at that time?
So I might ask Mr. Swales to add to my answer. The 2012 audit did focus on the purchasing of the fighter jets. The 2018 audit did not. In the 2018 audit, we were looking at the readiness or the ability of the forces to meet the NORAD and NATO requirements. But in 2012, our scope was a bit different. I know that there were concerns about management, about the assessment of risks, and about costing. But Mr. Swales might be able to add to that.
The report in 2012 didn't look at the question of personnel, and so the issue that was raised in 2018 wasn't examined in that report. That report was really about some of the questions around the transparency and the process for acquiring the new aircraft. At that time, there was some fairly different timescales being considered as well.
Thank you. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the issues you uncovered in 2018 may very well have existed back in 2012 as well. They're not necessarily new issues. I understand also the issue that you raised in your report, which is an interesting one, and I'd like to just question you further on that. In paragraph 3.52, and now I'm talking about the jets, you conclude that the additional operational requirements, meaning to conform to the highest level of NORAD requirements as well as NATO commitments, put national defense in a difficult position until the replacement fighters jets are in place. But can I just understand, based on our NORAD commitments and our NATO commitments, are the new requirements not sensible? I mean, if we have obligations in both cases to meet certain norms, and NORAD was at its highest level of alert, don't we need to be able to meet the highest NORAD level of commitment plus the NATO one?
So I don't think that we are in a position to comment on the policy decisions of the government. I do think that obviously when you look at a given point in time, the factors of what is reasonable and what might be a challenge for the departments or the forces to respond to might be different. As we mentioned in the report, historically, I guess before 2016, the focus was on meeting the NORAD requirement, and in 2016 that changed. Our point in the report was that it is not only about acquiring additional fighter jets. You also have to have a plan for having the technicians and the pilots to operate the fleet. So,
I mean, I agree completely. I don't think that I'm trying to dismiss what you said. I think it's important. I mean, we may have had these lacunes, as we would say, for a long time. I think it's important to know that we need to do better in terms of that. What I was basically saying, though, is that my understanding would be that we would be in breach of our agreements if we didn't actually meet the newer levels that were talked about, because we have to be able to meet the highest NORAD level and also fulfill our NATO commitments. Mr. Chair, do I have any time left?
You have a minute and 55 seconds.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Could I ask one question related to the shipyards? I think that we're all very interested in the qualification of the Davie shipyard in Quebec as a third official shipyard. And so my question is, will the addition of the third official shipyard help with delays and scheduling risks? I believe that you had mentioned that the government has implemented lessons learned from the past in bringing on the third shipyard under the National Shipbuilding Strategy. What lessons specifically do you think should be used to help draft the umbrella agreement for the third shipyard?
Thank you. So at this point, I don't know exactly what the status of bringing Davy on is. I know at the time of our audit that they were in negotiations about the umbrella agreement. With respect to the umbrella agreement, one of the most important pieces from our perspective is the idea of target state, reaching target state to be able to produce the ships according to the timeframes and requirements that are outlined. At this point, one of the recommendations that we made was to learn from the previous experiences with the shipbuilding strategy to date. And from that perspective, we would expect that the departments have taken on the information about how to approach reaching target state and the reasonable amount of time that would take for a shipyard, also so that they can plan ahead to when those ships can be delivered in a reasonable time frame.
Thanks very much. I assume that my time is pretty close to ending. So let me just thank both of you again for your work on both of these reports and all that you do.
Thank you, Mr. Housefather. We'll now go to Ms. Vignola for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us this evening. I read your reports on the procurement, on navigation, and shipyards, and I wondered, is it only 15 years since we had an armed force in Canada? I had the impression that there was hardly any plan, hardly any monitoring structures, no purchases, or even constructions to know where are we headed, where are we now. That was my general observation. Now, let me come back to your reports. In your report talking about the Air Force, you said more pilots were going on retirement than new recruits. Only 64% of pilots are qualified for the CF-18s. As far as you know, is the current situation about the same? Has it improved, or has the situation worsened? Let me ask Mr. Swales to add something after me. We do not have any information now about the state of pilots for the armed forces. Mr. Swales. What I would like to add is that in the annual report of the Ministry of Defense, they're saying that there's lack of staff in 50% of their military roles. It's not stated what role exactly they are talking about, but I'm sure pilots are amongst them because there are hardly enough pilots. So we can suppose from that report that it's possible that the situation may have worsened. So the situation is worsening, but we are buying 80 more planes. If we do not have enough pilots, it means that there are no pilots there to train the new pilots. This is disturbing. This is worrisome. In your recommendation on the Air Force, you suggest that recruitment and retention strategies be adopted. The department said there was a strategy for maintaining the capacities of fighters that involved 200 technicians, and in its protection policy, they want to add 200 additional positions for pilots. That's what I understood. In your opinion, if the department reaches that objective of 200 technicians and 200 pilots, will that be enough to meet the needs, to meet operational needs and international commitments? I think it's difficult to determine whether or not that will be sufficient because there is a reality that the fighter jets will be older. Mr. Swales, do you have anything to add? Let me say that it also depends on what they've lost over time, and that's not a piece of information we have. The two figures must be consistent with one another. In your report, you talk about hours for maintenance of planes. You talked about 24 hours of maintenance for each flight hour. Do you know if those number of hours have increased? I do not know if that number has increased, but it's possible that the aircrafts are older, that when aircrafts are older, they need more time for maintenance. Very well. Still in your report, you recommend that national defense carry out analysis to ensure operational life in up till 2032. And the department said the analysis should be was concluded in 2019. Have you had any comments about that? We didn't follow up on that recommendation. But we are considering doing that in the future. Thank you. Recently, I learned that the government had launched a competition to purchase armed drones to be bought from Scotland. We're talking, well, if you add to that the needs, the current needs and the future needs for aircraft, are those purchases going to be done without taking into account the necessary human resources that will be there? I will ask Mr. Swales to answer. I am not aware of the details on that question, Mr. Swales. I would say that that does not deal only with the Air Force. It's a problem for the armed forces in general to find out whether they have enough staff for the various programs and the various equipment. Of course, as I said, in their public report, they state the general number of people they need and the level of training required.
Minutes.
Well, thank you both for your testimony. Really appreciate having you here. And I think I'm going to follow in the same thread as Mr. Paul Hoos and Ms. Vignola. You know, in terms of the personnel shortages, can you talk a little bit about, you know, the failure, in terms of our failure to recruit? What have other countries done? Do you have any idea to ensure that they've got capacity, they have personnel, and where are we falling short? I know that obviously human resources is a big issue crossing all sectors of society right now, but what are the barriers? Is it compensation? Is it the work environment? Can you cite some of those things that might have been identified that you noticed while you were doing your research?
So the information that we have in this report, I think it is important to recognize that it is now a few years old. There have been developments along the way. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic created some changes in the industries that could contribute in some ways or others to technicians being available or pilots being available. However, at this point, I don't know what has actually transpired for national defense. As a previous question brought up, there can be a number of factors, including the attraction of working on new equipment instead of old equipment. But then again, you know, I'm only speculating at that point. Mr. Swales, do you have anything you might add to that?
No, we haven't looked at what other countries may have done as in terms of special recruiting strategies.
Is there barriers that you can identify, like that are notable?
Well, the last work that we did on this in any depth was our 2016 audit on recruitment, and it certainly, we raised a number of issues then about whether the recruiting personnel, had the fulsome, or providing the fulsome exposure to the different options available, and also whether some of the issues around the training times that it was taking would perhaps discourage people from wanting to join. So those were some of the issues that we raised back in 2016.
I think I'm just going to stay on the HR issue because, I know, especially right on shipbuilding, and it's a general D&D issue, but given the number of civilian workers at Department of National Defense, how much has the contracting out of defense work contributed to the delays? And I guess, in other words, how much of the delay is due to hiring temps and contract workers as opposed to having a properly staffed public service?
I don't know if we can say that we looked carefully at that element of the contracting out of staff. Nick, Mr. Swales, would you like to answer that?
No, we didn't. I mean, we do talk in the report about the availability of capacity in the federal government as a risk in managing programs, acquisition programs such as that one, but we didn't explore the question of the potential sources of that expertise.
In terms of the capacity, just overall in the shipbuilding sector, it's something I've asked before, and it's a great concern to me. I live on the West Coast where we're trying to build a floating dry dock. We've got the only deep sea port on the West Coast of Vancouver Island, yet there's no federal program for floating dry docks. And capacity is a real issue. Costs go up, the demand goes up. Can you talk a little bit about your research about the lack of capacity in Canada for shipbuilding and the need for the federal government to expand and invest in creating more options and utilizing deep sea ports like Port Alberni in my riding?
I think part of the research that we did showed that, and this also dates back to a previous audit that we did of the National Shipbuilding Strategy, I believe in 2013 or 2014. One of the objectives was to try to address what was termed as the boom and bust cycle of shipbuilding. When you look at needs, but you only address a need during a particular period of time, and then you shut down an industry, then it will take time to rebuild it back up. So in that context, strategy, the National Shipbuilding Strategy, with its three objectives, one being renewing the fleets in a timely manner, but also having economic benefits for Canada and supporting a sustainable marine sector, addresses some of those previous challenges. Now, that's only as good as putting it in place and monitoring it and delivering on time.
Do you think the government's putting forward like programs to expand capacity enough to actually ensure that we can kind of have an upstream, program that can help relieve some of the pressure on the bigger ports? And I mean, like, this is really a big deal because we've got communities that want to take the pressure off the big ports and can create efficiencies. And, in the long term, we could be avoiding shipping, boats overseas for refits like we're doing with BC Ferries and building boats somewhere else. I mean, long-term sustainability, do you think this is a program that Canada should be looking at and embarking on?
Well, I think that's a policy decision, but I do think that building capacity at this point in time, we mentioned a little bit earlier the target state work that's being done and the efforts that were deployed to try to assist the shipyards in retarget state and to also have the ships delivered on time is a start. But a shipbuilding industry, for it to be sustainable, it has to have a long-term view, and there needs to be constant monitoring and constant involvement from all parties.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Johns. We've now finished our first round, and we'll start our second round. And we'll start with 5 minutes with Mr. McCauley.
Great. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Thanks for your work and your answers so far. Just a couple of things. I want to ask you if you looked at the contract structures, and this is more in regards to the Irving work for the CSC and the AOPS, whether it's a cost plus, fixed costs, and whether PSPC has set up strong enough fencing to protect taxpayers.
We did look at the contract structure largely from the beginning part of the procurement process back in the 2013 or 2014 audit. At the time, we were concerned about making sure that the contract was fair and transparent, and that the obligations were clear. In the context of the current audit, we weren't focused to the same degree on that issue because the procurement had already started.
Yeah. Can I ask why not? Because you talked about the 2013 was focused on transparency and fairness. The current one is set up rather oblique, that parliamentarians still cannot get an answer on any of it. We're getting sued by, I think it's Fincantieri, because of accusations that the T26 did not meet the RFP requisites. So why did we skip over, or is that something that the AG should be looking at again, especially in light of what's happening in Australia with their version of the T26 being overweight and cannot meet the specifications as set out in the RFP, and it's the same accusations that are currently going on for our ships as they're being designed.
I can ask Mr. Swales to maybe add some details in a minute. At this point, this procurement process, the shipbuilding strategy had entered into some of the delivery, the implementation angle, and that's where we put our scope for this one to see where there would be delays if there were any, and mitigation strategies if there could be some. I'm not familiar with the details of the example you gave, but Mr. Swales might be.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think we would distinguish two things in what my colleague was saying. One is that our 2013 report was speaking about the selection of the shipyards to be strategic partners, which we judged to be following a good process. In the most recent audit, we did speak to some aspects of the contract arrangements. Particularly, we were concerned that the government didn't have sufficient steps and protections in there regarding schedule management. That it was not getting schedules in a timely way.
What other risks are there? And I want to bring an example. I had a briefing with D&D and PSPC on this several years ago. And we asked about, Irving being the contractor and such a large company purchasing services that are only available in that area from themselves. And, what protections do we have for them sole sourcing to themselves? And the comment from D&D and PSPC at this briefing came back, well, Irving has given us their word that they're not going to overcharge us. And I was kind of gobsmacked that both departments would have such faith in any corporation that just their word would be enough. So it doesn't appear to be there's anything written down or any other fencing to protect taxpayers. We've seen the costs balloon through the roof. Our allies in the States expect the CSE to be well above $100 billion. Does AG share such concern of kind of a lack of protection from for taxpayers in these contracts, especially the refusal repeatedly over the years in committee of D&D or PSPC to answer any questions about the makeup of the contracts, whether it's a fixed cost plus, and how the last ships, there's contract for 3, but the other ships.
Transparency and accountability are always at the forefront of our mind when we are doing our audits. In terms of the questions that you've asked about the contracts, in terms of the government's interests, we recognize that some contracts will have enforcement clauses. The question comes down to the relative benefits and costs of enforcing those contract clauses. I do think that the reality of seeing delays in the ships being delivered, we've shown that it will result in increased costs.
Yeah, let me just put a quick question. Are you satisfied there is protection for taxpayers in how these contracts are written?
So I'm going to defer to my colleague, Mr. Swales, on the details of the contract. in my view, we didn't raise concerns about the actual protections in the contract.
Are you comfortable that taxpayers are protected?
Thank you, Mr. McCauley, and thank you, Mr. Swales. If you could provide that answer in writing to the committee, it would be appreciated. We've just unfortunately run out of time. We'll now go to Mr. Baines for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us today, and thank you for your report. My questions are coming from Richmond in British Columbia, and I'm interested in the shipbuilding strategy because of its importance to our marine sector on the West Coast here. The report on the shipbuilding strategy reads, despite the delays, federal organizations have made adjustments to the strategy's implementation that improve the prospects of timely future deliveries. Can you go into detail about like the adjustments that were made? Either witness, please.
Yes, so I think that I'll start, and Mr. Swales might add to this. We do know that they changed the order of the building and delivery of certain ships to facilitate the ability of the shipyards to meet their target state and to deliver. We also know that the addition of a potential third shipyard was intended to be able to release some of the pressure on the delivery times for the ships. We mentioned also in the report some of the more short-term approaches that they took, whether it's chartering certain ships for specific purposes or leasing certain ships for particular purposes. But Mr. Swales, I will ask you if you want to add to that.
The other 2 points I would add is that at the start of our period, some of the expected delivery dates for ships were clearly unrealistic. The oceanographic science vessel for October of 2021, when it hadn't started yet. So clearly there was a need to make some changes. The other thought I would add is we comment on the fact that the schedule for the AOPS, the Arctic and Offshore Patrol ships, was changed to help to close a gap that would have opened up in production between those and the Canadian surface combatant, which would have been very costly in terms of loss of trained personnel and the need to rehire and retrain them.
Would you say that this improved the efficiencies in the report, or the potential outcomes?
Well, that was our conclusion, that this certainly opened up the possibility that ships could be produced in a more timely manner, and that some of the flow of work would be smoother, and that had the potential to be positive. Recognizing that this was, projecting forward into the future, and the result remains to be seen.
Okay, and then this report covered the period from 2018 to 2020. When was the last report done before that, prior to that?
We had tabled a report on the national, what was then called the National Shipbuilding Procurement Strategy in 2013, and that was shortly after the selection of the shipyards had been made to commence the strategy, but before any actual ship contracts had been let.
Okay, and what was the shape of our shipbuilding and ship procurement prior to the installation of the strategy, the new national shipbuilding strategy?
Well, certainly the report, the 2013 report, talks about the fact that there had been a long period when no government ships had been built, and so the shipbuilding industry had lost that capacity, and there had also been some failed procurements where the government had sought to run competitions for ships and hadn't received either any or compliant bidders. So there was clearly some challenges with being able to get agreements and contracts in place to build ships.
Okay, thank you for that. And just how much time do I have? I have enough for one more question.
30 seconds for a question and answer.
Maybe just some long-term lessons you feel that from this report that can improve Canada's naval procurement process as quick as you can.
So I'll just say that identifying the risks to success and the delays that might be occasioned, as well as regular monitoring and follow-up would be the lessons that I would glean from this report.
Thank you very much. And now we'll go to Ms. Vignola for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I would also continue questioning about the national naval strategy. What are the consequences of not quickly adding a third shipyard? Well, I think the reasons for looking into a third shipyard, the goal is to strengthen the possibilities of delivering ships on time. There is a possibility that there could be broader delays if we didn't have an increased number of ships constructed. Mr. Swales, would you have something to add? Well, that's basically it. It's the fact that it's just making sure we have sufficient capacity to produce ships before the older vessels come to the end of their life cycle.
De personnel se fait criant partout dans les forces armées.
The lack of personnel, it's all over the armed forces, the Coast Guard, the Marine. I see the national strategy only concentrates on the construction aspect, some of the economic benefits. There is not enough stress on training, recruitment to make sure that the 40-something ships we will have people actually running it. What's the situation? Do we have sufficient crew to run these ships? And is there a strategy guiding all of that? I don't know the answer to this question. Maybe Mr. Swales has some details. Oh. No, that's not part of the national strategy. This is the responsibility of the Coast Guard that take care of transition issues. Given this lack of personnel, what are some of the quickest and best solutions for the Marines and the Coast Guard to resolve some of these issues? Mr. Swales. I don't think I have any additional comments. I think it's the analysts that can look into the best ways to recruit crews for the Marines and the Coast Guard. Thank you.
Thank you. Your audit found that the delivery of ships were often delayed and delivery schedules were actually getting longer. It's also noted that the government's efforts to address the risk of unreliable schedules wasn't always actually effective. Can you talk about the factors due to the contracting parties use to negotiate a delivery schedule, and how could the federal government more accurately establish delivery schedules?
I think that I'd start by saying that
Excusez-moi, point d'ordre, je n'ai plus de traduction du tout. Merci, c'est réglé.
Okay. I would start by saying...
we had a little translation problem. Is that correct, Ms. McNaught? Okay, it's been solved. I had stopped the clock for you, Mr. John, so we'll start it at this point in time. Thank you very much. Please proceed.
Okay, thank you. I think we would start with a recognition that the government's forecasts for the schedule of delivery may not have been, or were not actually, they were not realistic. At the point of time that we were auditing in 2020, we had suggested that the government should use the lessons learned to increase the likelihood of delivery of ships on time. And in terms of the question about what were the obstacles, that there could have been many. I mean, I do remember as we were looking at target state over the course of the two different audits, the challenges for the shipyards to meet target state were many, whether it had to do with the personnel or the construction of the facilities for that. Mr. Swales, would you like to add to that answer?
I guess the other thing I would add would be to look at the detailed action plan in response to our recommendation on schedules that was provided by the department, by the departments in the audit to the Public Accounts Committee, which committed them to particularly introducing a tool called Earned Value Management into their review of schedules in a systematic and structured way. And so if those actions are followed through, then that would go a long way to improving the situation.
Thank you. How much time do I have, Mr. Chair?
Very, very quick hello and thank you.
Okay, we'll just get you on the next round.
Thank
Thanks.
you. We'll now go to Mr. McCauley for 5 minutes.
I'll take your 9 seconds, Mr. Johns. Gentlemen, can I just get back to the question I was asking? Does the Office of the Auditor General, do they believe the contract structures are set up properly to protect the interests of taxpayers?
So thank you for that question. We didn't raise issues with the structure of the contracts.
Right.
I know
you didn't raise them, but because you didn't look at it, or because you're comfortable with the setup of the contracts?
I think how I would answer that question is that we didn't raise concerns about the structure of the contracts. The question that I think should be posed to the government is how did they enforce the contract? What were the considerations that they were balancing to get to the decisions that they made? Okay. About enforcement.
I just want to get back to a question Mr. Baines had asked, and it's been, you quoted it in your opening remarks, and then on page 3 about, despite delays, government has made adjustments to the strategy's implementation that improved the prospects of timely future deliveries. The comments that we heard were they've reacted to the delays. They're opening up possibilities in the future, potential new shipyard, which is again in the future. But they haven't, what have they actually addressed? What have they actually changed to justify the comment that they've improved the prospects of timely future deliveries? Talking about adding a potential contractor doesn't quite qualify to me to meet what you're commented in your report. One seems to be an action they've taken as opposed to future actions they may take.
So as Mr. Swales noted a little bit earlier, some of those statements were forward-looking. The addition of a third shipyard.
Let me interrupt.
Was one.
Let me interrupt. Your comment is the government has made adjustments. That's past tense, not future-looking. So what adjustments has the government made as an accomplished, as you stated in your report and in your opening remarks? And I'm sorry to be pushy about this, but what have they done to address this to make prospects of timely future deliveries?
We would consider the procurement process to add a third shipyard to be an action. Obviously, it takes time to implement that action.
A future potential third shipyard is considered action achieved, according to your report then?
I think that we have to recognize that it does take time to put one into place. We also noted some other actions like adjusting schedules and build and delivery, timeframes. However, I think it is important to note that in our report, we also noted that there is very little wiggle room in terms of delays before these ships will go past their useful life and not be replaced by other ships. So there needs to be a very rigid and rigorous approach to monitoring risks to completion and delivery at this point.
Let me ask you about some of the pricing. we added I think it was a 6th or 7th AOPS. A couple of them have actually been delivered, but the last one the price was almost doubled of the average of the first ones. Did the Auditor General look at why the cost, now the price should be dropping as we learn how to make these. Did the AG look at why the last one added was almost double the average cost of the other ones?
So I think you're correct that we would expect that the cost of ships will drop as the shipyards become more experienced in building them. I'll ask Mr. Swales if he has any insights on.
Right, because you specifically reference adding the AOPS in order to end the gap between the AOPS and the start of the CSC, but adding it at such a higher price, is that a benefit to taxpayers or to the Coast Guard?
I think I would make two comments. One is that our audit was looking at the timeliness of delivery, and not directly at the cost. So we didn't directly look at that issue. I would say one of the other aspects
does it raise a red flag as an auditor, or is it you just drive by you just drive by and okay, that's someone else's issue, we'll look at it later? But doesn't that, when you're looking at the shipbuilding, doesn't that raise a red flag?
So I think it's fair to say that we are always aware, and we do take into consideration the costs and variances. However, we also look at in this audit, we were looking at the broader picture of delivery and timeliness of delivery, the obstacles to delivery. There's of course the other objectives of the national shipbuilding strategy that were at play as well.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Johari for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. Very interesting testimony, as well as thank you for the reports. I'm going to go back to the fighter jet reports. On section 3.19, your report indicates that in 2016, the Government of Canada directed National Defence to have enough aircraft available every day to meet the highest NORAD alert level, as well as Canada's NATO commitment. Later on, you indicate that it was a significant change, and I know you in your opening remark in response to some of my colleagues, you said you're not in a position to be able to make a comment about the policy, and I appreciate that. But when a word such as it was a significant change is used, I would assume there's a significant change on the scope. How are our scope changed, in your opinion, on the two fronts, on the supporting our commitment to NORAD and NATO, that put you in a position when you did your assessment that it says it was a significant change?
So I think I would answer that question by pointing to the fact that in the report, we identified that there would need to be a 23% increase in the number of aircraft. There would need to be about a 36% increase in trained pilots. What we referred to in the report was that the forces had 64%.
Did our commitment or the directive from the government meant that we had to go to a higher elevated NORAD or higher level of support for NATO, and that's why it's such a big change? Is that?
I think the difference was that we hadn't, as a country, been approaching meeting NORAD's highest level of alert and our NATO commitments at the same time. I think that's the answer to that question. That was a big change.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clarifying. Also, there was a comment about $3 billion and no plan, and I want to go back. When you did your analysis, did you look at general breakdown and categories that $3 billion was being assigned, and has that $3 billion been spent to date? And if not, do you know how much of it and where it's been spent?
I don't have the information since our 2018 report about how that money has been spent. We did identify that of course the plan that we would have expected would have been to deal with the combat capability, even though, well, of course, given that the aircraft would have been required for a longer period of time. There was also the element of purchasing the Australian jets, but we don't know exactly where that money has been spent at this point because it is 4 years down the road now.
I don't know whether all of it has been spent. You just know this is how much was earmarked. Okay.
That's correct, and that might be something we would follow up on.
Yeah, that would be great because I actually want to point out to section 3.21 of your report as well, which talks about in 2017 National Defense approved a $628 million plan to increase the number of available aircraft. At the time of audit, the plan was in early stage of implementation, and it was too soon to assess whether it worked or not. So at least we know there was a clear earmark of $628 million. And do you, 4 years forward, do you have any idea whether this money has been spent, and has it yielded the result that it needed?
I don't have that information. Sorry, I'm getting an echo there. Are we okay? I don't have that information at this point. That would be something that we would follow up on in future work.
Okay, thank you. Quickly going to quickly asking one last question. Now, I do realize that there are a lot of conversation around replacement of the CF-18s, and F-35s was one of the candidates in there. Now, back in 2010, there was heavy discussion on procurement of those, but those were delayed. Do you have any insight into why and what's the impact?
I might turn to Mr. Swales to see if he has insights there. I don't have any ideas to share at that point.
I think we're talking about the replacement, the fighter replacement project, which was I guess the word was reset at the time in the mid 2010s, and so we are now, as I understand it, at the point of assessing the last two competitors with a view to making a decision. It's been reported publicly anyway that a decision is due within a year or so.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll go to we've now into our third round, and we'll go to Mr. Paul Hoos for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Dépenses de 2020-2021. On parle ici que le pourcentage des flottes aériennes qui devraient être en bon état de service pour l'entraînement ou pour les critères opérationnels, la cible est de 85 %. On demande d'atteindre ça au 31 mars 2021. Puis là, en 2018, on était à 79. En 2019-2020, 60. Puis là, on est à 55 %. On a tourné en rond.
In 2018, we said we're going to buy Super Hornets, no pilots. Australian planes were bought knowing that we will not have pilots. At some point, it becomes whose problem? Is it a political problem or a problem for the Department of Defense? When we know that there are no pilots, no technicians, and we are buying planes, who decides whose problem it is? Our mandate is to audit the department. In our opinion, analysis carried out by the department showed that there were problems with pilots and technicians. A number was required. For us, accountability lies with the department. You're saying that the department should take the blame. Ultimately, is when a decision is made to buy used Australian planes, knowing that there are no pilots. Is it not the government that should tell the department we have a problem, it's not working? Is it not up to the government to say no? Of course, there are decisions, political decisions, but as far as we are concerned, we look at the actions taken by the department, and it's important for the department to provide information to the decision makers. That's the issue for us. Are you telling me that the department did not tell the government what it needed and the government did not have the information required to decide on the purchase? I cannot answer that question. Mrs. Wills, do you have any information on that question? No clarifications to add. Let's talk about surface compact vessels. We've heard that there's an Australian report that says that the model that Canada wants to build, it's very heavy and very slow for combat operations and consumes a lot of fuel. The PBO did an analysis of the types of vessels that Canada could purchase and said that the cost was even a lot higher for these 26 than what was provided. Now the Parliamentary Budget Officer doesn't have updates on the amount, and there's also the problem of capacity. As Auditor General, does this not raise a red flag for your office? Do you think that the change is necessary before it's too late? Mrs. Swales, do you have anything to say? I don't have any information to provide about that. We do not have any additional information. There are definitely concerns on this, that there are concerns. Well, in your office, you are aware of everything. But now, as the Office of the Auditor General, do you know that there's an Australian report that talks about vessels that we want to build that will cost more than $77 billion? Normally, DND should be sounding the alarm to find out whether we are going ahead or whether we are running into a wall. Is that what you would normally do? Do you have an opinion to give, members of Parliament? There are two things I can say on this report. First of all, I think that we talked about the national strategies use of experts to validate contracts. That was a good thing, and that's what they did in the Australian case. So that's a good example. The other issue is that the basic model is the same. The 26 model, it has to be adapted to the needs of each country. The way the Australians did it has raised some concerns, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be the same thing for us.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I really do appreciate the conversation and the responses that we've heard today. So thank you very much for your testimony. Besides increasing the naval capacity of Canada, some of the parallel goals or aims of the National Shipbuilding Strategy is to, restore shipbuilding, to rebuild, the marine industry, the blue economy, in some sense, and to create jobs as well too. We see that in our community, in our region, a company called Hike Metal, which is a small shipbuilder and supplier out of Wheatley, just outside, not too far from Windsor. Besides, other than distributing economic benefits to different regions, do you see other advantages for increasing the number of shipyards with the capacity to build, for example, icebreakers and other ships?
So I'll ask Mr. Swales to add to my answer. Obviously, we have 3 coasts, and the ability to operate on the west, the east and the north is becoming even more important as we are seeing shipping lanes expand in the north and that sort of thing. So having a shipbuilding environment here in Canada is a reasonable undertaking. At this point in time, the balance of getting ships in a timely way with the economic benefits and with the objective of getting a sustainable shipbuilding economy going is a challenge, right? Mr. Swales, would you like to add?
I think I would just add 2 points. I mean, one is, we did see in the late 1990s, early 2000s, the impact of a boom and bust cycle on shipbuilding and the costs that can incur and the time that can take to rebuild it in order to meet the underlying policy statement, which is that government ships will be built in Canada, broadly speaking. So there is certainly, if we're going to have that policy, it makes sense to have the capacity to implement it. The other thing that I would add is that we need to remember the shipbuilding strategy. While our report talked about the large ships, it does have 2 other components to it, which is small ship construction and repair, refit, and maintenance. And so, there's a lot of other activity going on through the strategy that requires an industry to support it or to undertake it.
With regards to, I know that in looking at Canada's fighter force, you talked about some of the HR concerns and the challenge with recruiting and retaining talent. And I know that that's outside of the scope of the shipbuilding report that you provided. But is there a sense that we're seeing an influx of talent, technicians, as a result of the fact that we've expanded the number of shipyards now and because of the national shipbuilding strategy? Is that something that again, I know it's outside of the scope of the report, but is that something that you've picked up on? Are we seeing, for example, local colleges, pumping out or churning out new graduates specifically in shipbuilding and with those technical skills?
So I'll start off with the comment that Mr. Swales made a little bit earlier about the fact that in the forces there might still be a problem based on their public reporting for recruitment and retention. I think your question expands into whether jobs are being created and whether the various regions are benefiting from that. Mr. Swales may have a view on that.
Well, I think I would say 2 things. One is that, through looking at the idea that there's a need to maintain the workforce, clearly that workforce has been developed. The other aspect is that one of the economic benefits that was required by the shipbuilding strategy, this is not something we talk about in the report, but it's a feature, is that the companies were required to invest in building building that workforce. So some of the economic benefits were specifically targeted at that activity.
Mr. Chair, how much time do I have?
You have 8 seconds.
Okay, I will yield.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to Ms. Vignola. Ms. Vignola, we'll give you an extra 8 seconds. So you have 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Eric.
Thank you, Eric. Very fast. In your audit on the national strategy, you said the government had taken measures to extend the useful life cycle of the old aircrafts, but you did not provide recommendations because lots of essential services were delayed because of the old aircraft. So why did your office not provide any recommendations on that? Mrs. Swales, any comment? It was mainly because our observation focused on the need for vessels to be replaced rapidly. For the extension of the life cycle, that was essential, but the real problem was to make sure that the new vessels arrived on time. In your audit, you also stated that you did not verify whether the vessels constructed will have the expected capacities. Why? Mr. Swims? The focus of our work was the deadlines to find out if the vessels would arrive on time. During our work, no vessels had been delivered. So the process for validating whether or not they had the required capacities wasn't possible for most of them. What resources would your office need to assess the naval construction strategy to make sure that all objectives of that strategy are met? I believe we have in-house capacity to do that work. The issue is whether progress has been made to enable us to do the work entirely. Thank you.
Mr. Johns, and as Ms. Vignola still had 10 seconds, we'll add that to Mr. Johns. Mr. Johns, you have 2 minutes and 40 seconds.
Okay, thanks. I'm just going to go right back to, capacity. I mean, you just touched on small ships a couple of minutes ago, and, here we are. And I've talked about Port Alberni and the Port Alberni Port Authority, who's actively trying to get federal investment to build more dry dock space, to build capacity. And what we learned, what we've been hearing at this committee is that, countries that have invested in long-term strategies for shipbuilding have much more lower costs overall when it comes to shipbuilding. Do you see potential for the government to create funding programs so that they can invest in building capacity so that overall it would help create deal with some of the timing on delivery schedules and of course costs?
So I think that's a matter of policy that would be a good question for the government. But I'll add that the idea of reducing costs by not having a boom and bust cycle is one of the objectives from before this strategy was even implemented. The procurement strategy was even implemented. So I think your question ties to the second and third objective of having a sustainable marine industry in Canada and also having economic benefits realized for Canada.
Right now, the markets where these ships are being built are very expensive when it comes to housing, when it comes to cost of living. Other countries, Norway, Finland, Sweden, they've decided to invest in rural coastal communities and expand their shipbuilding capacity in those areas. Do you see that because it's more affordable as well for people to live and for a long-term strategy, do you see that as an advantage that we should be looking at in Canada?
Your question makes me think of the focus that we place as an office on evaluating and examining how the government is achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, which would include infrastructure and obviously spreading out benefits across the country. At this point, of course, we look at what the government has committed to, but that lens is something that comes through to me when you're asking that question.
Yeah, and right now there is no federal program at all for communities like Port Alberni and others, and there's no dry dock capacity at all on the West Coast, pretty much. Thank you.
You, Mr. Johns, and you left that 10 seconds nice and clear and open. So we'll now go to Mr. Lobb for 5 minutes.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and that'd be my 100-meter dash time, 10 seconds. So I got plenty of time to run my 100 meters there. Maybe 35 years ago. Question for the individuals. Back in 2018, I think it was 2018, there was an issue with the welds on the first of the offshore fishing vessels, and it was to do with a semi-automatic welding machine. And you can remember back in that time they had to redo almost 120 feet of welds. And I just wondered, in your review, because I don't think the last of those have been delivered yet, in your report, I think you said it was under construction. And I just wondered, because that was a pretty significant issue, did your report look at that at all?
I believe that we did refer to that as a challenge for delays. Mr. Swales, did you want to speak to that?
Yes, that's right. We identified it as a source of delay, and I would mention that the third of those ships has now been delivered because, of course, our report was completed some time ago.
Okay, and was there any, was that issue corrected after the first one and corrective actions in place, and they didn't have issues on the second and third vessel, or was there still issues with the welds in the second and third one?
It's our understanding that the ships were accepted into service after examination and testing, and so that a satisfactory solution had been found.
Okay, oh, that's good. One thing in my area, they have Bruce Power, a nuclear power plant, and they're been involved with a number of refurbishments of reactors through the years, and each one, obviously, they become better and better and better, and now they're very efficient in probably world leaders in refurbishing reactors at my site. Is this something in your review and a report that you observed, was that as each ship gets passed through, better, more efficient, less overruns? Or
I believe that that's the expectation as the strategy moves along, that after the delivery and, well, construction and delivery of the first few ships, it will be easier and more efficient for the next ships. Mr. Swales, would you like to add to that?
Not much I can add other than to say that is part of the expectation around the delivery schedules of each of the classes of ship, where there are multiple ships.
Yeah, so in that case, the ones in the West Coast, where they were doing those offshore vessels, 1, 2, 3, is that what your experience was when you did your report, that 2 was quicker and better than 1, and 3 was quicker and better than 2 and 1, or was there not much difference 1 through 3?
We do have in the exhibit some of the actual delivery dates for the early ships, and it did show that, for example, for the offshore fisheries science vessels, that the second was delivered only 8 months later than the deadline, as opposed to 10 months for the first one. So there is a little bit of a speeding up of the delivery there. Of course, you will see that the next one, the third one, came a little bit later. Whether that is attributable in some respects to the early stages of COVID or otherwise, that third ship was delivered after our audit period had finished.
In your report in Exhibit 2.3, delays in delivering new ships had many effects, and so one was cost increase, and in 2019 you identified there was that a design change would cost $111 million because of delays. Do you investigate that, and was that design cost a mistake? Was it something in a technological change? Did you identify what that was and why that was?
I'll ask Mr. Swales if he might be able to answer that.
Thank you. Yeah, so the issue was, without going into the specifics, is that it was taking them longer than they had intended, and so and it was because because it's a very complex design, and so it was taking, the cost represented the additional staff time required to continue the work.
Thank you very much, Mr. Swales. And so we will now go to Ms. Thompson for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to stay with shipbuilding and represent St. John's East. So Coast Guard is very important, my riding, but to the province. So I wanted to just talk about procurement for a couple of minutes. So in paragraph 2.62 of your report, you mentioned that several ships are already at or beyond their expected service lives, in part because of failed procurement. What procurements are you referring to? And then to that, how would those have improved the situation if they had been allowed to go through?
So I think I will turn to Mr. Swales again for this answer, but when there are failed procurements, it is natural or almost unavoidable that there will be delays because these procurements do take quite a long time from the beginning to when you actually see construction and a delivery. Mr. Swales, would you be able to talk about the specifics of the failed procurements?
To a degree, I'm sorry. I do have the information, but not necessarily in my memory at this precise moment. But one of them was what became then the joint support ships, where an initial attempt was made to acquire joint support ships, and if I recall correctly, the situation was that there were no compliant bids, so nobody came forward with within the price envelope that the government had identified. So at that point, the decision was to not go forward with that procurement at that time.
Thank you, and I really appreciate number of questions in different areas. So I'll finish with a little bit more general. But how often in the delays that we've heard so much about in the last couple of hours to essential service delivery? So those delays, how often would they have been attributable to factors that were really outside of governmental or departmental control?
I think that's a difficult question to put our answer to put our finger on. I mean, I think one of the most important elements of our report is that thorough risk analyses and identifying specific time-bound and measurable risk mitigation strategies can help to reduce the likelihood of delays occurring. I don't know that we can put a precise amount of time or cost on exactly what could have been avoided right now without those processes in place. Of course, obviously, I talk about the risk mitigation and monitoring. There is obviously the importance of implementing mitigation strategies at the right time in order to make sure that that costs and delays don't pile up.
Thank you. I'm finished with my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Thompson. And we're now looking at 5:30. It's the end of the third round. And just because of the time, and unfortunately due to the vote, we got started a little bit late. So at this point in time, I want to thank the witnesses for participating today. And thank the Auditor General's Office for being here, and in particular, Mr. Hayes and Mr. Swales, both of you for your participation and answering our questions. And any that where you felt you could add more to it, or you were asked to submit something in writing, if you would forward that to our clerk, and our clerk would distribute that to the committee members, it would be greatly appreciated. So thank you very much for that. I would like to thank our interpreters for being here today and assisting, as well as our technicians and all the work that you've done to help us out, as well as our analysts and our clerk for the great work that they do in allowing us to move forward. So with that said, committee, I'd like to thank you for being here. We will meet again on Friday, and we will see you then. With that, I declare the meeting adjourned.